Yeah, good morning, everybody. Jimmy Wallace here with lesson 9 Q&As Zoom meeting here. So our second to last meeting for this class, and we're getting down to the wire here. So today we're going to talk about our Zone 1 lesson and some of the things that we'll want to factor in with that. I've got some examples I was going to show you all. And yeah, we'll go through the exercise here or the lesson and just make sure everybody's clear with what's expected there. And if you have any questions at all during our meeting here, don't hesitate to pop it in the chat or just unmute yourself. It's not like you're interrupting a presentation, so no problem with that at all. Before we get going, does anybody have any sort of specific questions about the main part of the assignment with lesson 1? Oh, sorry, lesson 9, the zone 1. So I'm happy to just kind of gear today's discussion around that. So if anybody does have anything they want to have addressed or any specific questions right now, we can dive right into that. Again, I think I was just to kind of back up to our last meeting. I sort of put it out there that if you were designing for somebody else and you're going through the process, you'll probably discover that your design protocol or the way in which you go about putting your design process together, it probably won't be in sync with these last 3 lessons. And part of that is, and actually this has come up for conversation with the rest of the instructors, and we'll be covering that off after this class is over, but we're definitely, we're trying to gear the course so that it reflects how you would go about designing. And I think for the most part, it does. There's some things within it that are maybe, kind of extra information that you might not include in a design. But the biggie is at the end of the process here and the end of the course where we're doing a plant system design, a zone 1 design, and then the overall concept. And it's actually in some ways backwards. You might find this, right? So you might find as you're going through process, you'd want to actually get your concept plan completed before you start looking at plant details like you did in your last assignment. And then zone 1 would just sort of evolve out of that whole concept. So just have that in the back of your mind, that if you're finding this a little bit awkward, or it's not feeling like it's a real fluid process, that again, these last 3 lessons could be changed up a little bit if you were doing another design here. So, all right. The upside is you have this template file and you've had some feedback through the course. So that's a great thing, because a lot of online PDC courses don't get any feedback, and that's not ideal, because feedback definitely helps. And even if you were designing for somebody else, the feedback you're getting from your client is really valuable too. So that is something to keep in mind. Let us share screen here, and we'll go to, let's see here, we will go to our assignment page. And I don't think I'll go over the building survey at all. That's pretty obvious. Okay, so unless somebody has a specific question about that. I think this is one of these extra items that I was referring to earlier, in that if you're providing a design for somebody, you're probably not going to be doing a building survey for them. Even as interesting as it is, and it's there's no doubt there's a lot of really interesting material in the course. This is something you probably wouldn't provide as a deliverable. And I would even go so far as to say your zone one, you may not separate out as a distinct sheet. I've never done that. Not to say you couldn't, that's for sure. It's just, yeah, it's something I haven't done before. Maybe I will in time, but I tend to do an overall concept all in one go rather than chunking this out. But let's take a look at this as it is set up. And so zone one obviously is that inner core of your project site. And there's some examples here. If there wasn't a building, what you could do about that. And really you're looking for the center of human activity, right? So, and that's often the house. Again, it could be could be another building. It could be another space. I know I've had in the past, I've had students that designed public spaces. So they had to either use like a picnic area, a covered area, or something like that within their drawing. But I don't think anybody here is in that boat at the moment. So that should be all pretty straightforward. So you're going to have to indicate what kind of structures and energy saving technologies and plantings you would incur. So it's interesting because we're asking for southwest, east, and north aspects. And there's this encouragement to make that band around your habitation as effective as possible. And what you might find, it really does depend on your house, because where I live, we have we have our south and our west side of our house that are, tightly linked to a zone one. And then our north and west or east side are more zone two. They're not, they do not get the same activity. So you may find that that's the case as well. There's no cookie cutter, that's for sure. So every project is going to be a little bit different. Yeah, so let's see what else we're looking at here. Nothing too earth-shattering in terms of what we're asking for you to include. So this will be part of your final design. So in other words, it'll be part of your final concept. So zone one will be a piece of that. Now you may find you want to put together some rough overall plan before you dial into zone one specifically, but that's completely up to you. With an urban setting, often the zone one will be quite a big chunk of the overall, so that can be the case. Let's see here. So if we take a look at our template file and we look at that zone one piece, we're being asked to put in your base plan, right? So that's pretty straightforward there. And some existing conditions, some images, where you've taken those images. Little bit of a zone map overlay here, microclimate, just so we get a really good feel for what's going on in that area. And then we get into the meat and potatoes here, where we're looking at the main goal and some of your patterns and strategies. There's some good examples here we can look at. So we have a statement of purpose. and some of those patterns and strategies, as well as some images and a zone 1 being shown here and the overall. So this is an important piece. We want to see the whole base plan and then what you've designated as a zone 1. And this is almost, this could be classified as almost too large. If we look at Bill Mollison's Permaculture Designer's Manual book, which is, not easy reading, but it's packed full of info. And zone 1, he would allocate as being about a 10-foot radius around your house. And that's not a very good line there, but it would be something like that. Now, again, where I live, it's not that at all. It goes out more than 10 feet on our south side. We're way out, maybe more like 20. And then over on our east side of the house, it's really doesn't exist, zone 1. And then on this side, it does. So again, you're going to find that your setting is going to be unique. And yeah, don't worry about trying to stick within that band around the whole house. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. It is a great idea, and I think if we were building a new house and if we were crazy enough to do that, we would really be trying to spread our landscape out in a slightly different orientation. Okay, so that is that sheet there. And then we're going to look at water strategies. So what are you doing within your zone 1 with water that's either hitting the roof of the house or driveway or whatever may be active, within that zone 1 area. So hopefully with, let's say, more of an urban area, your water strategy may be a rain garden. Perhaps you're taking water off the roof and sending it into a rain garden. If you have a really good roof surface, maybe you're collecting in a cistern for distribution later. So do think about that. That is something that really differentiates, in my opinion, permaculture design from traditional landscape design. Is we're really looking at a lot of the assets that are found within a project site. And, often water is viewed as a liability when it comes to the fall, winter months. And then we pump water in during the growing season. So it's really, you're doing your site the most amount of justice if you're looking at that year-round annual average precipitation and what you can do with it. And sometimes you can't do anything with it. There's no doubt of that. You may be in a spot here where placing a rain garden is just not a good idea. There are other options. So you could do like a swale trail, which is almost the same thing. Well, not really, but it's the same premise. You're trying to infiltrate water and remediate it at the same time. So yeah, water is a big part of that. And I know I've gone over that with you before. We have sort of a distinct water layer that we will do on a design. So once you have gone through the water, then we want to see your proposed plan here and your strategy and any other additional elements that you're adding to this area. So it could be, when we're looking at things like energy systems, a lot of people think, well, I got to do solar. No, yeah, that may or may not work. There's some great examples here. A rocket oven. I've wanted to build one of these for a long time. Solar ovens, even clotheslines. So it doesn't necessarily have to be solar panels, right? You may have wind wind power where you are. You may have micro hydro. There's all kinds of ways. Even with the energy system, here you may be creating shade, right? So that may be something that you want to consider. And then we're going to go to your SWOT analysis. So that is pretty straightforward. And then, of course, any comments or questions here? And I got a couple of questions in the chat. So let me take a look at those. Sorry, I didn't see them before. All right, so Jessica has a good question here. Says, with our wet environment, many recommendations are to keep vegetation away from the house so it doesn't damage the siding. Right, I would agree. Yeah. Also, with fire danger, recommended to keep vegetation back away from the house. How far should vegetation be away from the house? Well, that's a really good question. And I think, let me show you. I don't remember of this is just where I live in BC here. There's a bunch of, this is probably the best idea is you look locally for some of the recommendations. And there we go. Here's our landscaping guide. And we can download that. And what I'll do, I'll just, and bear in mind, this is for British Columbia, Canada, so it could be a little bit different from your location, but it should give us a decent starting point. There we go. So we have some different zones. I was waiting for that. So they have an immediate, intermediate, and extended zone. So if we go back to your question, Jessica, and we look at the first part, the wet environment, I totally agree. When we first started designing landscapes, I wouldn't really think too much of this. And probably because they were smaller when I first started in this business, I was really just renovating people's landscapes. I wasn't starting from scratch and designing. But as we started doing more and more, we realized that you're quite right. We do not traditionally put beds up against a house. And if for some reason we need to do that, what we do is we'll put in like an 18-inch strip of aggregate or gravel right up against the house and then start the soft landscape after that. So that's kind of a common approach in my area, but I agree, you don't want vegetation up against the house. And part of that too is splash, right? So typically you'll have 8 inches difference between the siding where it starts and the finished grade. So, you know, if you have soil going up to the house, you're going to get some splash up there, and you want to be careful of that. So that's what we do. And yeah, again, fire damage, that is going to be really specific to your area. So where I live, it can be pretty dry during the summer months, but if you go, you know, head down into, say, Eastern Washington or into Oregon, it, you know, that and California, you're just going to have that increase. So these guidelines might be a little bit different, and you're going to have also recommendations about the types of plants, what not to use. You don't want something flammable, so to speak. And yeah, so you can check that out. I see Derek threw in a comment here. Gotten very different answers depending on who you ask. Yeah. Here's I'll throw this in here. If you go to Javan Bernakovich's All points. There we go. Put all points design. And you just search for fire. Javin put together this brilliant a brilliant documentary here years ago. And I would highly recommend you check that out. It's very, very interesting. So he did a great job with this and a lot of really good info. So again, that's All Points Design, it's YouTube channel, and it's Facing Fire, Building Resiliency Through Wildfire. So check that out. And Rachel has a question here. In urban areas, is having vegetation against house? I just wouldn't have vegetation against the house. There's too many reasons why you wouldn't. So you have maintenance. Most houses you're going to paint at some point, and then that creates a real hazard. It's also, you just don't want to put fuel next to your house if you can avoid that, right? I mean, we have cedar siding, which is on our house, which is 40 years old. And it's like having buckets of kindling against your house. That's bad enough. So having,
I guess I was thinking more of almost like raised beds for vegetables.
oh yeah,
It's not wood siding on this structure, and it would just, I mean, it's a really sunny area. It's at the moment surrounded by concrete, which I hope to have them take out or encourage them to take out. But it just seemed like it would be perfect for something like tomatoes, something that was there through the summer, and it's, very juicy kind of a
yeah.
plant. It just seems really low risk. And I was wondering about that.
Well, that's a good question. You can get really torn with those sorts of situations. I know where we live, we have a south facing wall. That's kind of like what you're describing, this brilliant microclimate. And over the years, we've had plantings against it, and it's amazing the benefit that little microclimate can have. But what we've ended up doing is we hit a happy medium. So we want to have access around the house, good access around the perimeter of our house. So we put in basically a 5-foot wide walkway next to that wall, and then we've done some raised beds, and we actually have a structure going vertically to create a bit of shade against that part of the house too, against the wall. So even at a 5-foot distance away from the house, it's incredible microclimate still. So you might want to consider something like that, Rachel.
Okay. I mean, there's not a lot of space. I might still stick with my idea, and I mean, it'll be interesting to see what you think of it. Because I get your
Sure.
point. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I just don't know that they have the space for that.
Right.
Um,
Well, there's no right or wrong answer,
yeah.
right?
There are
It's
better answers than others. So
there are there are some, some things that fall under the aesthetic umbrella. You could say, well, that doesn't look right, or that looks right. And I think there is something to be said with trying these things and seeing how they work in your location. It's a little trickier when it's a client. I tend to, when it's a client, I'll steer into my safe direction, right? Things I know are going to work, and I'm not pushing into an unknown place that might not go well. So when I'm at home, yeah, it's more of a try anything.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, in some ways, our landscape over the last 27 years has been, a series of experiments, and it's great, but it's almost as if it's been a perpetual renovation for the last 7 or 8 years. So that's the joy of feeling like you need to create and wanting to change things. So it drives my family bonkers, I'm sure, at times. But yeah, play at home and be a little bit safer on the job would be my approach. Because if things go wrong on a job site, you know, if a plant dies, well, that's the way it goes. But if a whole bed doesn't do well, you know, that's or let's say it's even worse, a seating area doesn't work out, or you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. So again, we kind of play at home and make sure that we're staying on course when we're looking at clients' projects, and that's one of those things that I don't veer from very often. Is now saying that, I'll just bring up a design that I can show you as an example, which counters what I've just said, that we did indeed place some plantings right up to the house. Let's see here. So I can switch over to that. So this is a planting plan. It's kind of hard to give you the context of the site here, but this is a planting plan. So it's the overall concept with these planting details put over it. So it's kind of one sheet. But we redid the front. We've got a big rain garden. Let me get my drawing tool going. So there's a rain garden, goes under the walkway here. Whoops, it's not quite that big. So there's a rain garden out front. And so that's the main planting, and there's some screening around it. But you can see right here, we got pretty close. So we got within about 18 inches of the front of the house here. And it doesn't show in this image, but there's a strip of aggregate. So it'd be 18-inch wide strip to avoid splash. And over here, this is sidewalk. So that's not really, so that's as close as we dare come to a house, at least nowadays. And going right up to a patio, sure, do that all the time. Yeah, so I thought we came a little bit closer, and then we're very mindful of what we place here. So here's an evergreen shrub that's quite short and fragrant. But let me just get away from that for a second. I can show you a couple other examples here. I tell you what, before I get into that, is there anything specific anybody would like to talk about or have me go through? Because we're about halfway through our meeting, and I can show you some examples of what we do. We can do all kinds of things for the last half here, but I really want to structure it so it's best for all of you.
Jamie, this is David. Do we focus on this design, this lesson? Do we focus just around the building where we're going to be, basically where we live? This is what we're going to be focusing on?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, David. Zone 1 can traditionally be that, but in your project site, it might be a little bit different. So
Okay.
where I live, I don't even know if I have a design I can show you of my place, but it is a little bit different. So instead of the band going around the house, there is zone 1 areas on our south and west side, and that's the center of our activities. It's around some raised veggie gardens, and we have a poly house and a growing area where we do a lot of our starts, and so that's our zone 1. So yours might be quite different, but traditionally it would be around the house, David. So I'm not sure if that's clear as mud or.
Yeah, no, it's clear. It's just every afternoon, I'm just trying to figure out what I should do. I mean, my wife and the kids get out and stare at the chickens in the afternoon, and it seems like that's the only place that they get together, and we really enjoy staring at the chickens. Other than walking in the garden, which is away from the house, the afternoons seem to be the looking towards the chicken coop and watching the chickens and the animals run around in the basically what we call like a south facing uh slope yard area.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, I have no plans to really change that too much, and I'm wondering if I can focus on around the front of the house where I do want to make the changes, like and turn that into a zone 1 eventually.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question, and a really good idea. I think what you'll find is if we go back to I think it was like lesson 4, when we were getting into zones and
Mhm.
microclimates. So you would have looked at your project site and determined the zones at that time. So now that we're implementing some new design ideas, you might find that that whole zone layout changes a little bit. So exactly with what you're saying, you want to enhance the usage of an area. So that's where you might want to think, how am I going to do that? How would I pull people out into that area? So normally there would be a feature that would do that, right? You're either going to be growing food, or you're going to have that area to sit and relax. It may be something you walk by. Like technically where I live, we're on 5 acres, and every day we go for a walk, half-hour walk on our property. So, really our trails are a zone 1, even though we don't really manage those trails, if that makes sense. But one thing to keep in mind is zone 1 is that highest level of management. It's going to be the highest level of care in your landscape. So in a small urban setting, that probably doesn't really matter much, but in a larger setting, it really does matter. So on 5 acres, yeah, you can't treat an area that's, say, 300 feet from the house the same way you would if it was 10 feet away. A zone 1, something you walk by all the time, easy to pull a weed, easy to make sure it's looking awesome. Something that's way further out, much harder to manage. And that's one of the really nice things about the zone, the whole zone approach with permaculture design is looking at these different usage areas and gearing our landscape accordingly, so you're not really stretching yourself. And I think it's also really evident in agricultural systems when you start to look at where zones are there and how spread out they can become. And in that situation, you're trying to cover as much ground as possible with the least amount of energy versus your house. But it's the same idea. You want to try and have your landscape look as good as possible with the least amount of effort, in a lot of ways, right? So hopefully that
Yeah, that
helps you out,
works.
Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem, David. Jenny here has a question. Could you recommend a good reference for drainage design? Having trouble figuring out overflow from the rainwater harvesting off the greenhouse roof. Yeah. So I guess, Jenny, I'd have to have a little bit more info. So you've got what kind of a roofing system is on the greenhouse? Is it poly or is it glass or polycarbonate? Do you know? Polycarbonate, perfect. So yeah, you obviously figured out the guttering. So what are you currently doing? Like, what is your plan to harvest that water? You're going to put it into a cistern, is that correct? Or is it just a small rain barrel, or what are you have galvanized gutters? Yeah, that's a little scary. So you want to be careful of galvanized products. You might want to go with aluminum if you can. The reason is Galvalume's good, but that I'm trying to remember the product that comes off of galvanized metals. It's not great for your vegetables anyways. So you're going to put it in a 55-gallon drum, and then you want to overflow it. Yeah, so you'll probably find the 55-gallon drum is full in one rain event or pretty quick. So yes, the overflow is there, this is where you try and think about how can I best use that resource? Is there a way for you to slow that water down as it's leaving the landscape? Can you put that into a rain garden? Can you put that into sort of a swale trail, or is it just going to be more of a liability and you want to get it off site? I guess that's one of the things to look at is the position of the greenhouse versus your house and what your options might be. So if your land is sloping away from the house, then it gets quite easy to manage the stormwater. If it's coming the other way, then you want to be really, really mindful. You don't want to infiltrate next to your house. Can you tell us a little bit about where it is? Do you have slope going away from your house, Jenny? Or, I mean, if you want, you can always put your document, a link to your document in the chat here, and we can take a peek at it, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, well, we'll give Jenny a minute to get that link together. Yeah, and drainage is one of these really funny elements. When we first started in the industry here, we went into some projects that had a huge drainage component. In other words, we had some very significant stormwater management issues to deal with, and this was before the days of permaculture for me. And we drained it, and it works, but well, it was well, it was necessary in terms of trying to change an area to suit a client's wishes, but yeah, I would do it differently today, although I might not get the job. But oh, there we go. So we've got Jenny's link here, and I'll copy that and put it. Okay. Okay, I remember. All right, where is your greenhouse? Sorry, Jenny, I'm just trying to find where your greenhouse would be here. It might be something you're adding after your last assignment here. Can you just describe where it might be, Jenny? Page 130. All right. Uh-huh. So I guess we're right here. Yes, we are. Cool. Sorry, I missed that. Yep. Okay, so let's go to a slightly just got to zoom out a little bit here. Yeah, well, based on the topographic info here, just with what little I know about your site, it looks like you could pull water in this direction, right? And I'd be less excited about sending it that way, just because of the steepness of the slope here. You don't want to start to create erosion. So if you had a 55 gallon, which might be right here, you could, I'll show you an overflow here. Let's see if we can get a simple picture for you. Yeah, well, that's showing inlet, right? Excuse me, and all these are connected. This is crazy. I would never do that, but it's resourceful, we'll say that, because the cost of all of these drums, you could easily buy a cistern, and it would be a little easier. So here's, yeah, this might be a helpful thing to show you. Maybe not. There's a few too many things going on. So one of the things I'd keep in mind for all rainwater harvesting, whether it be a cistern or a barrel, you'll notice that this is a 3-inch pipe, and this is the inlet. So the water comes off of here, goes through this filter, and the dirty water goes that way, and the clean water goes this way, and it drops into the tank. So just make sure this is the overflow right here. So the water level will never get above that. So you got to be careful where you put your overflow. And say this is a 2,000 gallon cistern. Well, you've already lost 200 gallons, right? So that's a bit of a bummer. So you want to get this up as high as you can, but you want to make sure that the overflow size is the same or greater as the inlet. So if you had a 3-inch inlet and a 2-inch overflow, and you had a really high rain event, you're going to be unable to keep up with the flow. So you'll get the overflow will just build up and build up. So be careful of that. You'll notice some systems like this one doesn't appear to have an overflow, and that's not a great idea. Even with a small setup like this, you definitely want to overflow, or you're just going to be dealing with a lot of stormwater issues here. Now, the other thing you can do is get basically a diverter. I'll try and come up with a image showing how to use this, but we use these on all our jobs, all the rainwater jobs. And yeah, let me see if I can find one easy here for you. Uh-huh. Okay, so this is this is a good example. This cistern here is one of these narrow, which I don't like. These are quite a narrow, top-heavy cistern. This had to be strapped into the house. It's not an ideal setup, but this is what the client wanted. And there's no overflow. There really wasn't any where to put one. So what we did here, and it was agreed, client agreed, is we have the sliding gate valve right here, which is this part. Okay, so if you, it's for low pressure situations. So if you open that valve, then the water, when it's open, the water comes off the roof, goes through this primary filter, and then it just heads down and goes into the storm system as it normally would. If we close the valve, then we have the water come through, then it builds up, and then it runs along here, and then it'll go down into this device. It's called the first flush device. And all the sediment and a lot of the contaminants off the roof will sit here, and then this will travel along and go into our cistern. So there's no overflow in this setup. So our client's well aware, as this gets full, you need to manually open this valve to bypass collection. So I hope that makes sense. It's quite a large topic. We could spend a few weeks just talking about rainwater. So it doesn't really matter if you're in a small setup like this, or you are in something a bit larger. Here's this same thing. We have a sliding gate valve here. These are just a few jobs that we have done in the past. There's another one, sliding gate valve. That way the water coming off, boom, can just go, if we're all filled up, it can return to the storm system, and otherwise it will head underground and come up and go into this tank here. So that's why all of this is solid piping, because this is a wet system. When it's being filled, you have water filled right up in these pipes here. And you'll probably notice one thing. You'll think, there's asphalt shingled roofing here. Why are we collecting? And in this case, it was for an ornamental garden. So we're not too worried about the fire retardants and contaminants. It was in this situation, there is an incredible lack of water. And you can see from the back here, this all rock back here and the low performing well. So to have any kind of ornamental garden, they had to have some catchment there. All right, so let's go back to, so long-winded answer to your question here, Jennifer. One thing you could do if you wanted to keep your water in your system and you're collecting here is you could consider overflowing in a pipe, a solid pipe, out front here. And I know you have plans for other things here, but you could do, it looks like you could get away with a little rain garden out front. You have space here, but again, you have slope. That's a bit of a concern. So otherwise, if the rain garden is not a good fit, and you have water coming off your roof and you're putting it into here, you'd want to have that sort of bypass option. So you could just open that sliding gate valve, and the water's going to head into that storm system normally. I hope that makes sense, Jenny. If not, I'm happy to look at more of that. Okay. Yeah, and that's, you're quite right. There is lots to think about. And let me just show you something here. And this is one of the reasons that we go about our design protocol a little bit different. This is a drawing we did a little while ago. And so after we set up our base plan, this was all drone imagery, and we had topographic info. So the first thing we do is our water layer, right? So that's all about making the most use of the water hitting the site. And in this case, they had a lot of, they had excellent roofing, metal roof, and the desire to grow lots of plants. They have some vegetables, some annual veg, and some permanent plantings. So what we did was that's where we start, and then everything gets built around it. So we figure out what roof areas we're collecting from. Sure why that's not zooming in. That's interesting. But we do these calculations here. So we have potential for 12,000 gallons of storage and then up to 15 here. And we can figure out our month-to-month precipitation rate and our calculated usage based on the amount of existing landscape. And it tells us how much we're going to have to supplement. So with this example up top here, we have to supplement 26,000 liters, and this one is 15, and down here is 8,500. So then it's up to the our client to just decide what avenue they want to go, and but this drives the whole landscape. Okay. So Rachel's got a question here. Is there a site that describes a rain garden well? Yes, there is. I can show that to you. Yeah, there's an excellent resource here. And all you have to do is Google. I'll put this in the chat too. This is the Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington. So applicable all up and down the coast pretty much. It is specific to Western Washington in terms of, say, soils and plant usage. But this is a great handbook. I have definitely, when I did my first rain garden, I really leaned heavily on this, and a couple of reasons. They very good explanation overall, how to design it properly. I won't go through all that with you. How to size it, right? Because how big, how big does that need to be? Well, it's all based on your collection area and your soils and how well they drain and what kind of ponding depth you want. So that's one of the beauties of a rain garden is you have a rain event and you have your ponding depth. So this becomes almost like a swampy pond. And then all of this water, if it's done, if this is all set up correctly, all this water will infiltrate, and this will be empty within, less than 24 hours. Certainly where I live, our rain garden will hold about 3,000 gallons of water when it's at capacity, and it'll it's gone within a few hours. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, that's a really good resource. And one of the treasures of this is at the end when we get into plants. But let me show you this. So the rain garden's got zone 1. So this might be confusing because we're talking about zone 1 design. But a rain garden zone 1 is the very bottom. And this area gets flood, it gets drought, it gets, you name it, thrown at it. Zone 2 is this sort of middle area. It gets a little influenced by the water, but not as flooded. And then zone 3 is up here at the top. So these are very distinct planting areas. And this is where you want to make sure you're picking the right plants for each specific zone. So if we go back page 69 onward, selecting plants, there you go. Here's an explanation of all those zones. And then we get this great list of plants and which zones they work in. Some work in all 3, some only work in zone 1. And this is very, very helpful resource to get started because it takes a little while to plane with these environments, these growing systems, to really get this, nailed as to what will work well and what won't. So yeah, very good resource. You can check that out, Rachel.
Yeah, and I have another question, Rachel, here.
Sure.
So again, this is a really, pretty small urban site in Portland, Oregon. And as you can imagine, we get a fair amount of water, a lot of rain during the winter. If we were, it's hard, it's a little scary to disconnect a downspout if you don't have the area to accommodate like a torrential rain. Um, yeah, I mean, that's my, I guess that's my concern, is that if you say, oh, it'd be great if you disconnected your downspouts, but you can't, you've got to have a large enough rain garden. You can't be close to the foundation because they have a basement, etc.
Yeah, no, good, really good points. And a lot of those items are addressed in the manual here. So one of the things is keeping your infiltration at least 10 feet away from your structure. And I would go further personally, but it does depend a little bit on the lay of the land. So if it's sloping away from the house, it's obviously going to be safer. But what you have to do is you would look at, let me see if there's an example here. Okay, we'll use Jennifer's drawing here. Let's say your roof area that you're collecting off of is right here. And it's easy to determine, right? Because if you have a downspout here, and you're not collecting any more off of that particular downspout, then you have an area to start with, your collection area. So let's say it was 100 square feet, just as an example. With that, if you take a look at the guide that I pointed out here, and they have an interesting chart looking at where is it now? Soils and percentage of rain garden to your collection area. Don't know where I've lost it now. It's in here somewhere. So where I guess I was going with this is where I live, I will ensure that I have at least 10% of flat. There we go. There's the sizing chart. So some of it is testing out your soils, which you've already done, right? When we went through that soils in lesson 6. So you should be able to determine what infiltration rate you have. But basically my minimum would be 10%. So if you're collecting a 100 square foot roof, the flat bottom part of your rain garden, which I just want to show you again here. So this section right here that's flat, you'd want that to be 10%, or in this case, in the example, it would be 10 square feet. That would be a minimum, and you might want that to be a bit more. But what'll happen here is if we have an unusually high rain event and we get our full ponding, and then the infiltration's not keeping up, we're just going to have it go to overflow. So that's your safeguard. And like all rainwater harvesting structures, this is absolutely critical, is to have overflow. Otherwise, you know, you could, with a rain garden, an overflow would be caused somewhere, right? If you didn't plan for it, it would happen somewhere. But yeah, that would be sort of a minimum percentage to look at.
So it's entirely possible that on a small site, a small urban site, given the location of your structures, that you just might not be able to accommodate an appropriately sized
Right.
rain garden.
Yeah, exactly. And you may have the space, but you may not have the soils, right? You may find that you have, say, a lot of clay content that inhibits that infiltration, so that you have to shift your thoughts there. Just before we sign off for the day, I'll show you one set of images here. So that's an interesting comment. Jessica is saying they're making raised rain gardens. A lot of traditions are requiring them. I have seen those, not where I live, but yeah, there's no reason why that, I don't see how that would be much different actually. Because we're still trying to encourage, it would actually raised, I don't think I'd like to do raised rain garden personally, because the beauty of the traditional raised garden, the way it's set up here, is it's like a pit planting. So yeah, you're saying they want to just slow that storm system, which it would, but why not benefit your landscape at the same time? So I guess where I'm going is with this pit planting, you're going to get way more benefit out of your landscape. So in other words, you'll probably see a greater benefit in the vegetation than you might with a raised system. I don't know. I haven't built one of them, so it's interesting, and I totally agree. And in some ways, if you want to, if you were concerned with regulating that storm system, a surge in your storm system, then just having a cistern in place is also a good idea. Now, as soon as the cistern's full, that's another thing, right? You don't have that in place, whereas the rain garden is constantly going through that cycle of getting water and filling and then infiltrating. So it's emptying for you. But yeah, that's a fascinating, I have seen one, not again where I live, but that's very interesting. I don't think you can go wrong with any of these, but I guess one thing I really have taken seriously is Brad Lancaster's work. It's called harvestingtherain.com. Yep. So he's in Tucson, Arizona, very different to the west coast of the island here. But the premise, there's there's so many things that we can take away from his work in Tucson and sort of modify that to what we're doing here. And you can see this is a very similar effect, right? It's a very similar thing that we're trying to do. The difference here will be the planting systems itself will be a bit different. He's going to have trees in his pits, whereas we're going to have trees probably over on the edge here. Unless it's a tree that really likes to be overloaded with water during the winter months. But check this resource out. And his books are fabulous. I've got both of them, and very, very, very informative. Not only with water harvesting, but with sun and shade harvesting, and how to have a cool house even without the use of air conditioning. You know, he's able to, in Tucson, moderate the shade that's hitting the side of his house. So yeah, can't say enough about that. And I could go on and on all day about rainwater harvesting. Rachel, are you feeling like your questions or comments got answered there satisfactorily?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to think long and hard about, I think, harvesting in that zone 1 area that I'm being asked to do, or, you know, water management in that zone 1 area. I
Mhm.
think it might have to happen in a different area.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree.
I think I'm just too constrained in that zone 1 in the back. You know,
Yeah.
but it's helpful, and it just shows me how much I don't know, and I need to dig into this some more.
Yeah, the the rainwater harvesting end and the whole water piece. I actually got into before I got into permaculture. It was part of my journey. And that's why when we do our design work, it's on the leading edge of our design ideas. What are we doing with this water? And then once we've determined that, we start to shape everything around it. So the plants are actually the last thing we ever look at. And that's opposite to how a lot of people would approach it, because they're plant lovers. I got to have this here, right? So,
But it seems like it's the best way to do it, because if you get the water management wrong, it can be devastating.
oh yeah, it can go very wrong.
Very wrong.
Yeah. So that is a very critical part. And instead of draining everything off, trying to hold some of that resource within the landscape to benefit it. And or that may even just be, you have an asphalt shingle roof, and that you have fire retardants coming off the roof in the water, and you send it into a little rain guard to try and remediate that, so that it's not going to end up in another body of water somewhere. Because funny enough, all these compounds, they end up in water, and there's nothing the water can do about remediating. It has to go into a compost or soil, or mushrooms can help. But when we get this pollution ending up in the water, it has to get rectified with a different element. So we need the soil, we need the compost, we need aeration to help with these. So yeah, water is a big piece. But I could go on forever about it. Is there any other questions anybody has today before we finalize our meeting here? Okay, doesn't look like we do. I want to thank everybody very much for being part of the meeting today. And yeah, you're welcome, Derek. If anybody has any questions through the week, don't hesitate to drop me a note. Do we get stuck? And yeah, very much appreciate all your feedback. And again, I think you'll find that if you do find it's a little bit awkward working on zone 1, maybe even take your thoughts out into the rest of the landscape and just get a bit of a rough concept down pat before you dial too far into the zone 1. But yeah, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing your work next Monday. So you all take care, and thank you again. See you later.